In this tutorial, we're going to show you how to create the components from the vectors that we created in a previous session and model the magic bean sign. We're going to look at how to create components from the two-rail sweep and the Create Shape tool. We're also going to look at how we can create components from a bitmap in order for us to create a texture. So let's just go to File, Close. So let's go and open an existing file. From the project folder, we've got the Magic Beans coffee sign vector drawing file. So we'll open that up and you can see we have all of the vectors that we created in a previous session. Now before we go ahead and model the part, let's just come over to File Operations. We're just going to review our job setup. So we'll click in there. Okay, so the only bit I'm interested in is this bottom portion here, our modelling resolution along with the appearance. So at the moment we've got our modelling resolution set to standard, which is 1,000,000 points. And now in this case, as we are creating relief models here, I'm just going to up the amount of points that we're going to put in our job. So we'll set that to very high. So we've got 4,000,000 points. So we're really maximizing the resolution there. Okay, so the appearance, we're going to go and we'll go with Canadian maple. I could go ahead and press OK. Okay, so let's go up to this icon here and we'll look at tiling our windows. So we've got the 2D view on the left and we have our 3D view on the right. And then when we start to create components, we'll see them in the 3D view here. So to access the modelling tools, we need to come over to the modelling tab. And here I have all of the tools to create and edit 3D components. So we're going to start by looking at the base shapes of the sign. So to start with, we're going to look at organising our component tree. I know that I'm going to be creating quite a lot of components here, so we're going to organise this right from the get-go. So we're going to start by renaming level 1. I'm going to right click, we're going to use the option here to rename the level. Here we're going to call this one base. And then any components that I create now will be added to this base level. So now we're ready to look at modelling the base shape of our sign. And to do that, we're going to look at using the two-rail sweep function. So let's go over to the modelling tools. Second icon, we're going to use the two-rail sweep tool. That will open up the two-rail sweep form. And the idea is that we select two vector rails and a cross section will be swept between the two rails to create the shape that you desire. So in our example, we're going to select this vector here, shift and select this vector here. We're going to use this option here to use selection. And so the software has now transformed those vectors into drive rails. We have a red rail here, we have a green rail here. You can see, judging by the arrows, that they are both travelling in the same direction, which is good, as it means that when I apply my cross section, the cross section is going to travel in the same direction between the two rails. So all we need to do now is look at applying our cross section. So I'm going to look at using this vector here, and then we could go ahead and apply that to our start point over here. So I'm just going to click on that, and that's going to assign that cross section to that start point there. So all we have to do now is press apply to see the effect of our cross section being swept between the two rails. So if we go ahead and press apply, you can see in the 3D view the software has created a component based on our profile being swept between the two rails. Now if we just pan and zoom into this area over here, you can see that as the cross section is being swept between the two rails, we're actually presented with a little bit of a problem here. Now you can see that the corners aren't flush and they appear to be twisted. Now the reason for that is if we take a look at our cross section, the cross section is starting at the same point on both of those rails. And looking at the rails, we can see that the red rail is a lot larger than that of the green rail. And so as the cross section is being swept around, it's actually becoming stretched between the two rails, and therefore it becomes out of sync, which is evident in the twisting effect that we're seeing here in the corners. So a way to visualize what's happening here is to imagine that each side of the cross section is a race car and that they're both traveling around the racetrack. So we have a red car on the red track and a green car on the green track. Now the red car is going to have to travel a lot faster than that of the green car so that they both meet up back at the start point at the same time. And so to help us, we could look at applying a cross section at each one of these corners. So I know that when we created these vectors, we did so in that they had the same number of nodes. So all we have to do is right click and use this option to add to all rail nodes, and it's applied that cross section at each one of the corners where we have a node. Okay, so when I go ahead and press apply now, you can see that we have nice mitered corners. Perfect. So I'll put that back in Z. So next thing we need to do is just fill this area in with flat material. So we have an option here, fill center of inner closed vector rails, and that's going to fill that at the height, the highest point of the cross section. So if we just zoom in on that cross section there, it's going to do it to this point here. Okay, so if we just come zoom to fit there, apply that option to fill everything inside. We're not going to scale this to an exact height. I want it to the height of my cross section. We can give that a name, so we're just going to call this one base, and then simply go ahead and press apply, and you can see it's created the base shape for us. So if you wanted to learn more about the two rail sweep, then I recommend that you take a look at the two rail sweep guide tutorial, which you can find in the related videos. So let's just put this back in Z, and then we can close out of the two rail sweep form. So now we're going to look at creating some recessed shapes into our base. So to do that, we're going to go into the create shape form. So here I'm going to select this vector here, I'm going to hold down shift and select this vector here. Now what we need to do is we need to look at our profile and various other options to control the shape that we're going to apply between these two vectors. Okay, so in this case, what I would like to do is apply an angled profile. I'm going to set the angle to be 60 degrees, so I just type that value in there. And coming down, I do not want a base height. For the final height, I actually want to limit the height. I'm going to limit the height at 1/2 inch. And so it's going to create a shape with an angle of 60 degrees, and then once it gets to 1/2 inch in height, it's going to flatten off. Okay, so let's just apply to see what that looks like. So if you take a look, so you can see our 60-degree angle is flattening off at the 1/2 inch height there. Okay, so this is a good shape. However, I want this subtracted into our base shape. So I come over here and use the subtract option, and then we're going to give that a name. We're just going to call this one recess, press apply, and then we can see it's made the changes, and then we can start a new component. So next we're going to look at this circle here. So we're going to create a little bit of a dish shape in here. So this time I'd like to go with a round profile. So we use the round option. The angle here, I'm going to go with 45 degrees. And we're going to limit the height again to 1/2 inch. I'm going to set the combine mode of that to subtract. And then we're going to call this one dish. And then simply press apply. We can see the effect of those settings in our model. Okay, so that's what our part looks like. Right then, so we'll put that back in Z, then we'll close out of the create shape form. So now I'd like to look at applying a texture that's going to sit within the recess of our sign. So to help me keep my part organised, I'm just going to minimise the base level. I'm done with that now. We're working with a new element of our design. So we're going to right click and we're going to look at inserting a new level. rename this level by right clicking, and then we could just assign that a new name. So I'm going to call this one texture, and then anything that I create now will be added into the texture level. So I want to create a component based on a bitmap that I have, and the software has the ability to do that. So up into the modeling tools, second row, second icon, we have this option to create a component from a selected or imported bitmap. So if I use that option there, I can locate my project folder, and you'll see in here I have a coffee beans JPEG file. And if I click on that and open it, the software will automatically convert that JPEG into a component. So let's go ahead and press open. And so we can see that component there in the 3D view. We can see the 2D grayscale representation of our component here in the 2D view, and we can also see the component within our texture level of our component tree. Okay, so I want to size this up so that it fits within the outer circle that we've got here. So with this circle selected, I can see in the lower right hand corner of my screen that the circle is displaying a width of 20 inches and a height of 20 inches. So I'm going to look at sizing our new component so that it fits within that circle. So with that component selected, let's go to transform objects and set selected object size. I'm going to alter the height of this. We're going to make that 21 inches. That way we're definitely clearing that circle. Then we could go ahead and press apply. Close out there. And I'm going to take that component, shift and select the circle, come over to transform objects. We're going to look at aligning our component to the center of that circle. So if that option is selected, we're going to use this option here. Okay, and then we can close out and everything is now aligned to our circle. So let's go into the 3D view to take a look at our texture component. So I'm going to put that in the ISO view, and then using the scroller of my mouse, I'm just going to zoom in on the texture. So you can see that we do have quite a lot of roughness there. Now most images you get will have quite a lot of noise in them, and this is all to do with the way that the images are compressed down to make the file size smaller. So to reduce this effect, we're going to look at applying a smooth filter. Okay, so the smooth filter tool can be found within the modeling tools. It's this icon here, apply smooth and filter to selected components. Okay, so you can see now we're able to smooth our part. So we have a slider here. Here we can look at increasing the smoothness, and you can see that that has made a difference already. However, I feel that we need a little bit more smoothness there, so I'm just going to put it to maximum smoothing. And you can see that looks good. I can still see that what we're representing here is coffee beans. So we'll bake the current smooth in there just to accept those changes, and then what we can do is we can just simply close out of the smooth components form. So I'll put that back in the Z view over there. And so now we want to look at cropping our texture to the recess vectors. So to do that, we select our component that we want to crop. Then we hold down Shift and we select the vectors that we want to crop our component to. And with all of those selected, we come over to the modeling tools and we use this option here to clear the area of the selected component outside selected vectors. And this basically works like a cookie cutter. So let's take a closer look at how our coffee beans texture is sitting within the recess shape. So you can see we've got some interesting results here. Okay, so the texture is clearly adding on top of the base shape. Now we want that texture to actually blend in to the recess shape so that we don't have all of these interesting shapes building on top. And this is what we're seeing here is basically the result of our texture component adding on the angled edges of that recess shape. So let's take a moment to look at our component tree. Okay, so at the bottom we have our base level, which has the recess component inside. Now above the base level we have a new level, which is the texture level, which holds the texture component. Now that texture is set to add, so the level is adding on top of the base height, so it's adding on top of anything that's sat within the base level. So in order for us to make the texture blend into the recessed shape, we just need to alter the combine mode of the texture level. So to do that, we right click on the texture level, go to combine mode and set that to merge, and you can see now it's blending into the walls of the recessed shape just as we expected there. Okay, so one final thing that I'd like to do, and that is just to alter the shape height. So we've got quite a lot of height in here, so we're just going to look at dropping the height of our coffee beans texture component. So to do that, we'll select it, go into the properties here. You can see we have a shape height of 0.403. I'm just going to reduce that down to 0.2. Press spacebar to accept that, and you can see we have a much more subtle effect there. We've really lowered the height, but yet we can still see the detail of the coffee bean texture. Okay, so let's just close out there, and we'll just click to undraw our coffee beans texture. And now we're going to look at modelling the leaf motif. So we're just going to minimise the base level, minimise the texture level. We're going to undraw both of those. We're going to right click on the texture level, we're going to insert a new level, we're going to rename that level, we're going to call this one the leaves. Okay, so we're just going to focus on the leaves for now. That's why I've switched the texture and the base shapes off. So to start with, we're going to look at the berry shape. So with this vector here, we're going to go over to create a shape from vector outlines. So we want to create a rounded shape for our berry. So we're going to go with a rounded profile, angle of 45 degrees. This time we're going to scale the height of this to 1/4 of an inch. So this enables me to control the highest point of our component to a value that I enter here, which in this case is 1/4 of an inch. Give that a name. We're going to call this one berry, and then we could simply press apply and see the result of that there in the 3D view, and then we can close out. Okay, so next we're going to look at modelling our leaves. Now you'll remember that when we drew the vectors in the previous tutorial, we did so where we're going to look at using the 2-rail sweep modelling function to create the leaves where the cross section is going to be this vector here. Right, and so to do that, let's select this vector here, shift and select this vector here. We'll go over to the 2-rail sweep tool. And so in here, as I've already selected my vectors, we're going to say use selection. So you can see that I have a red rail on the left, a green rail on the right. They're both starting at this point here and travelling up, which is correct. Now if you found that one of your rails was travelling in the opposing direction, all you'd have to do is simply right click and then use the option to reverse the rail, in which case it's okay in my example. So now all I need to do is assign a cross section. So I'm going to hold down shift and we're going to look at using this cross section here, and then we could go ahead and press apply. Okay, so let's just take a look at what we've got here in the 3D view. So just zoom in there. Okay, so at the moment we can see it's adding on top, so we need to alter that so it's merging with our dome component. And we can also see that it's maintaining the height throughout. Now, as this is an organic shape, what I would prefer is to have us scale the cross sections against the width of our 2 rails. So where we have much greater width between the 2 rails, we have more height, and where they are closer together, we have less height. So we're going to look at using this option here to scale the cross sections with the width. I'm also going to look at scaling it to an exact height of 1/4 of an inch, and if we hit apply we can see the changes there. So we've got a much more natural shape there where the height is not being maintained, it's purely scaling about the width of the 2 rails. Okay then, so we'll just put that back in Z, and then what we can do is we could go ahead and give that a name. So we're just going to call this one leaf, and then we could simply press apply and we'll just close out of the form. Okay, so let's just use this option here to zoom active view to the drawing limits. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take that leaf and create a mirrored copy of that below our berry. So to help me do that, I'm just going to go into the drawing tab, and we're going to look at drawing a polyline. So I'm going to snap to this point of our circle, snap to this point of the inner circle, right click to accept that. If we just zoom in over here, so now I have a line that goes through the center of our berry. That's going to help me when I come to mirror the leaf. So we'll take the leaf, we're going to shift and select the line. Then in the mirror tools, you see we have this option here to flip about line. I want to make sure that I create a mirrored copy. So we'll use the flip about line option, and you can see that it's done that there for us. Okay, so let's just close out of there, and we'll use this option here again to zoom to fit. So what I'd like to do to complete this leaf motif design is to take our leaf components along with the berry components and create a copy over to the right hand side. So to do that, let's select all of the components that we want to mirror over. So we'll shift and select those components. Just press F to fit that to our screen. And then with them selected, we're going to go back into the mirror selected objects tool. We're going to flip about the job center, we're going to create a mirrored copy, and we're going to flip that horizontally. Okay, so you can see it's created that over to the right hand side. So let's close out and we'll go into the modeling tab. So even though we can see in the 3D view we have the copied components there, we have the grayscale representation of those copied components in the 2D view, and we can see in our component tree we are displayed with the berry, the leaf and the leaf, and they have brackets with a number next to them, and this number represents that it's a duplicate or a copy of a component. Right then, so just click into the space there to deselect everything. So let's switch on the texture level, and we'll also switch on the base level. And so here we can see how our leaves is being displayed within our composite model. We can see that that texture of the coffee beans is actually transmitting through the leaf components. Now I don't want this to happen. I want the texture to be more in the background, and I want the leaves component to sit proud of the texture. So what's happening over in the component tree? So the leaves level is adding on top of the texture, and as a result that texture's being transmitted through, so we can see that through our leaf components. So to solve this, we simply right click on the leaves level, set the combine mode of this so that it's merging with our composite model. Okay, so that's more of what we are looking for. However, I am losing a little bit of the leaves to the depth of the texture. And so what I need to do is I need to look at raising the leaves. Now rather than apply a base height to each one of these leaves, what I can do is look at applying a base height to the overall level. And then that will enable us to lift the leaves so it's that proud of that texture. So to do that, we select the leaves level and we'll go into the properties form. So in the base height, let's just increase that, let's say to 0.05, and press space to enter that in. Okay, so it's not quite, we're still losing a little bit of the leaves there, so I might go for a bit more of a bigger jump, and we'll go straight to 0.2, spacebar to enter that in, and we can see now the leaves are stood proud of that texture, and that's all down to the fact that we've added a base height to the level, and so everything within this level is built up on top of this 0.2 base height. Okay then, so that's that area complete. So let's just put that back in C, and we'll close out of the leaves level. So now we're going to look at modelling the coffee beans that are going to sit inside of our dish shape. So let's just minimise the leaves level. We're going to right click, we're going to insert to level, we're going to right click, we'll rename that level, and we're going to call this level coffee beans. Okay, so with that level, the active level, we can now go on to create our shapes. And the tool we're going to use is the Create Shape tool. So we'll start with the bean at the top here. We'll go over and we'll use the Create Shape tool. So we're going to look at applying a rounded curved profile to the bean. Okay, so the angle, I'm going to put that to 90 degrees. And then what we could do is we could go work our way down the form. We're going to look at scaling this to an exact height. Okay, so we've got that at a quarter so far. I'm going to change that. I'm going to scale that to an exact height of 0.2. Okay, I'm going to set the combine mode of this component to merge, and we're just going to give this a name, and we'll call that one bean. We could go ahead and press apply. We can see the result of that there in the 3D view. Okay, so that's good. So we'll put that back in Z, and then we'll go ahead and start a new component. So let's select the new bean that we want to create a component from. We're going to go with the round profile. Again, we're going to use an angle of 90 degrees. The final height we're going to set for this, I want this a little higher than the bean that we've just created. And the reason for that is that I want this bean to be prominent and in front of the bean in the background. So we'll look at putting a height there of 1/4 of an inch. Set the combine mode of this to merge, and then we'll give that a name, and we're just going to call this one front bean, and then we'll go ahead and press apply. So looking at the bean there in the 3D view, we can see that part of it is being obscured by the top bean. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I want to create the effect that the top bean is in the background and that this front bean is in the foreground. And we want to make this stand proud of the top bean. In terms of the shape height, I'm happy with the height that we've got. We've got a nice roundedness to it. However, the only part that's letting us down here is the top, where it blends in to that top bean. So we need to look at lifting this front bean at the top part of it so it appears as though it's sat in front of the top bean. So to do that, we could look at applying a tilt. Now, a tilt is basically like applying an angled base height. So if I check the tilt option here, we can use the set anchor tool, and then over in the 2D view we can apply our anchor point. So we're going to start by applying our anchor point at the bottom here. So you always want to start it where you least want to apply a height. Okay, so that's this bottom area here. Once I've clicked in the 2D view, you'll see that I've now created my anchor point, and now I have this cursor that is being pulled from that point. And this is where we're going to choose the direction that we want to apply the tilt, in which case I want to apply it in this direction, going over the bean directly through the middle there. And then when I click to accept that, that will apply the tilt in this direction, in which case I can come over here and I could look at using the slider to increase or decrease the tilt. So let's take a look in the 3D view. So you can see we have quite a lot of heights there. We have almost like a vertical wall. So we need to look at reducing that down so it's just enough that it's just coming over the top bean. So let's have a look at using the slider. We'll just decrease that down. Okay, so I'm just going to bring it down. That's not too bad. I want to try a little bit more. Let's see what 3 looks like, and we'll use the space bar to accept that. And you can see now that's perfect. The front bean now appears as though it's in front of the top bean, and we haven't created too much height there. So let's just put that back in Z. And now we're going to go and start a new component. So here we're going to look at this crease. Okay, so there's my vector selected. This time we're going to go for an angled profile. So we're going to make it so it looks crease-like. So we want it to subtract into our front bean at quite a steep angle. Okay, so here we're going to go with a 45-degree angle in this case. We're going to have no limit here. We're going to set the combine mode of that to subtract. Then we'll give that a name, and we're just going to call this one crease. and then press apply, and then we can see the result of that in the 3D view. Okay, so I think that's good, so we'll put that in Z, and then we can close out of the create shape form. So looking at the result of that in the 3D view, one thing I would like to do is just nudge the crease down a little. And so with that vector selected, I'm going to shift and select the crease, and we're going to select the combination of both of them to put it into transform mode. Just using the down arrow key, I'm just going to nudge that down. Okay, so I like how that looks there. Right, and so let's just maximize the 3D view. I'm just going to take a look at the beans as an overall part. Okay, so one thing that I would like to do is look at lifting the top area. I feel like it's getting a little bit lost into the dish. So what we can do is we can look at applying a tilt to a group of components. So the first thing we need to do is we need to look at grouping the components. I'm going to take the bean, the front bean and the crease. So hold down shift, select the crease. That means that they'll all be selected. And then I'm going to right click and we're going to use this option to group those beans. So you can see we've got the bean group. And if I press on this plus icon, I can see the individual components that created this group. Okay, and so this is a way that the software just temporarily sees a combination of all of these components as one entity. So if I just minimize that, and then in the 3D view, we just double click on that group, click again to put it into transform mode, and you can see that I have a blue square here. And if I click on that, that's going to show me a very small component properties form. And here I can apply a tilt just like I did earlier in the 2D view, except this time we're doing this in the 3D view. So we're going to use the tilt option, we're going to set our anchor point. So we're going to set our first anchor point here. You can see I've got number 1 next to my anchor, and now I need to set my second anchor point, which is number 2, and I'm going to click in this direction over here. So set it so it's going up in this direction, and then what we could do is look at applying the angle there. So if I just increase that, and then if we just twiddle that around, you can see that's quite a lot of height there. So just going to use the slider until we've got a reasonable height. So I'll just bring that down. Might just want to just type in a value. Let's try 1.5, space to enter that in. Okay, so that's a nice lift. It's not too much, but we can see now that it's lifted off the base shape. It's not being washed into the background. Okay, so we'll just close out of that. And so to finish this off, we're going to look at smoothing this group. So with that group selected, let's go over and use the smooth tool. So Aspire is going to flag up a warning telling me that we must bake this before we edit it. And the reason it's done that is because the software can see that we are working with a group of components, so 3 individual components that we've just grouped together, and it can only perform a smooth filter on baked items. And so we need to bake it in order for us to smooth that out. And that's okay, I'm happy with what we've got here. So we'll go ahead and press OK. And so that will bake the group, and we can no longer access the individual parts that form that group, as it's now one entity. And so if you wanted to go back at this stage, you'd have to undo the bake operation. Okay, so in the smooth filter, we're just going to look at just applying a very small smooth there, maybe around 25%. Okay, so that's just enough just to knock off those hard edges. Okay, so we'll bake that, and then we can close out of the form. Okay, so we'll close out there. So at this stage, what I want to do is just check that the height of the beans isn't coming over our dish shape. So what we can do is we could just select the bean baked group. So we're just going to rename this, and we're just going to call this one coffee beans, like so. And then with that component selected, we're going to go into the properties. Okay, you can see we have a shape height of 0.5075. Okay, now we don't want this coming any higher than the 1/2 inch that we've set our base height to, and we can see clearly that's over. So we're going to look at just decreasing the height of this to 0.48 of an inch, press space to accept that, and then we can close out. So to make sure nothing else is coming over the 1/2 inch base height that we've got on this flat here, what we can do is look at this option here to scale the Z height of the model, and we can see that the highest part of our model is 1/2 an inch, which is this flat here. So if this was displaying any higher, then you'd need to look at the individual components and then reduce those. Okay, so we'll just cancel out of there. And so now we're ready to model in the last part of our sign, and that's the fresh coffee text. So let's tile our windows horizontally, and then we're just going to minimize this level. We're going to insert a new level by right clicking on the coffee beans level. Right click, we're going to rename that level, and we're going to call this one fresh coffee text. Okay, and then with that selected, that's now the active level. So we're going to select the word fresh, we're going to hold down shift and select the word coffee. Then we're going to come in and use the create shape tool to create a component from that text. So in terms of the shape profile for the text, I'd like to give that an angled profile. I'm going to specify an angle of 75 degrees. I want to limit the height of this to 0.4 of an inch. So when the shape gets to 0.4, it's going to flatten off. Okay, we're going to give this a name. We're going to call this one text, like so. And then we're going to press apply, and then we're just going to close out there. So looking at the text, again, we can see that texture being transmitted through the text there. And again, that's just down to the fact that our fresh coffee text level is currently adding on top of the other levels and components within our component tree. So to resolve this, we're going to right click into the combine mode, and we want that to merge so it blends in with everything we've got in our composite model. Okay, the final thing that I would like to do is just look at applying a very small smooth over on the fresh coffee text just to soften the edges. So we'll select the text component into the smooth filter, and we'll look at applying kind of 25 to 30% smooth on that. So we'll just drag that cursor up there. Okay, so that's perfect. So we've softened the edges, we've got some nice text in there, it's bold, it's standing out from the textured background there. So we'd bake that, and then we'd simply close out of the smooth components form. Okay, so we'll just close out there. So let's just go back into the scale Z height of the model, and you can see that we haven't gone over the 1/2 inch flat that we have here, so I'm happy with that. So let's cancel out there, and what we can do now is we can go ahead and save the file. So we'll go to File, Save As, and then in the project folder we're going to call this one Magic Beans Coffee Sign 3D Modeling. Press save, and you can access that from your project folder.